in this campaign, there are many, many policy ideas that we want to develop. But we also want to develop how people do politics and how they're involved in it. And so later this year, we're going to be holding an economic policy conference on how we can develop the economy in Scotland, how investment can take place, how part of the £500 billion National Investment Bank that we're proposing could and should and must be spent in Scotland, what the infrastructure needs are, what the manufacturing industry needs are, what the green energy jobs are, what can be achieved when the imagination and the skills of everybody is unleashed from a straitjacket of top-down policy making, top-down decision making and top-down instructions. When you liberate people's minds, give them the space and the opportunity, anything is possible. And a society that thrives on inequality cannot itself be a particularly healthy society. And when we're told that somehow or other this is all a bit of a strange aberration, our party has now the biggest membership of any socialist party in Europe, and it's still growing. And I want it to grow even further, because when we're a very large organisation and very large party, we're not just a door-knocking election machine, important as the door-knocking during the 3-4 weeks of election campaign obviously is. We're also a campaigning force within the community at all the other times. And when people are empowered by their own achievements in the community, they begin to see how the empowerment of people can do things very differently. Take, for example, the health service in our society. I'm always in wonder of those that manage to campaign for successfully and eventually achieve a national health service free at the point of use as a human right for everybody in this country. If you read the pamphlets delivered after the Second World War by the government on what the National Health Service would do, they're quite amazing. That was a time when, yes, there was austerity of a totally different sort. The austerity was that they wanted to restrict luxuries in order to invest in necessities. What we seem to be doing now is destroying necessities in order to invest in luxuries. It's the wrong way around. So that National Health Service, free at the point of use, that National Health Service, free at the point of use, has achieved a great deal, but it has massive health inequalities to deal with. There are two in particular. One is the life chances, the life expectancy, basically is less the poorer you are, less the worse your housing is, less the area in which you live if it's a particularly low-wage area. That has to be addressed by investment, it has to be addressed by better health services, it has to be addressed by better housing. And then there's another one, and that is the mental health crisis that's facing the whole of the UK. 1 in 4 of us in our lifetime are going to go through some form of mental health stress. We can get help, we should get help, we shouldn't have to wait for that help, because in waiting for that help, sometimes terrible things happen. One of the biggest killers of young men in this country is suicide amongst them, because they've been isolated, because they didn't necessarily get the help they should have done, and because there's a sort of macho culture that you don't talk about mental health and stress, you leave that to somebody else and at the same time make jokes about it. Well, no more of that. Let's do two things. Behave differently, all of us, ourselves, but also invest in the services as necessary so nobody waits excessively for the help they desperately need at a point of crisis in their lives, and don't discriminate them against them in job opportunities or anything else later on because they've been through a mental health crisis in their lives. Let's just go enough to funding issues. They are different in different parts of Britain. They are different in their intensity and their form, but fundamentally what the new Labour government did in 1997 onwards was decide that it could fund public services through the private finance initiative, where you would get a hospital or a school apparently free as a gift from the private sector. and you would enjoy this new building, and you could turn up and attend its opening and be very excited by it. The problem was, in effect, in many places, schools and hospitals became tenants of publicly owned buildings, and the payment levels are absolutely astronomical. It would be like buying a house on a credit card. You wouldn't actually do that if you were being sensible with your money. And so we want to end the whole idea of PFIs, take them back into the operation of the Treasury, so no longer is every hospital or every school that has a PFI penalised for decisions that are made in the past. Instead, they can actually concentrate on what they ought to be doing, which is caring for patients and teaching children. That's the real That policy we launched in London on Wednesday. Diane Abbott, our Shadow Health Secretary, and I launched that document. And today we had a lovely event in Edinburgh as part of the festival to launch a document, a consultation document on culture and how we approach the idea of inclusion of arts, culture, music, dance, poetry, literature, painting, in the lives of all of us. Give every child a chance to learn music, every child a chance to develop their imagination, and every adult the opportunity to continue their enjoyment of cultural opportunities. So we don't restrict it to those that can afford to go to good quality music. We don't restrict it to those parents that can afford to send their children to private stage schools or anything else. We instead recognise that cultural industries are something we value, they're of an economic benefit, but they're also of a massive social benefit. Bring people together in a cultural experience. You brought them together for lots of other things as well. It's in our DNA, it's in our psyche. Let's be proud of it. Let's put money into theatres, into libraries, into music, into art, into culture, for the good of all of us and the generations that follow. We're doing is putting forward policies on many, many areas. I've just mentioned 2 or 3 of them today. There are grotesque levels of inequality in Britain and terrible levels of payment and employment of people. And so, amongst the 10 points we put forward are about employment law, are about rights at work, are about ending the indignity of 0 hours contracts, are about ending the minimum wage for young people, which is so far below a living wage, it becomes gross exploitation. And ensuring that apprentices are properly paid and properly trained in all the apprenticeships they undertake. I realise there are differences in different parts of the UK on higher education and further education, but I simply say this: if you restrict access to colleges, if you remove the support for young people to go to college in the first place, they're not going to get the opportunity to go to university unless their family is wealthy enough to help them to get there. Every child deserves a decent education. Every young person must have the opportunity for good quality training, good quality apprentices, or good quality access to university. Not just for them, but for all of us. A better trained, better educated workforce is good for everybody, and if there's a good engineer looking after our car, our train, or our plane, we're all safer as a result of it. There's a public good in educating everybody. The final point I want to make is this, on our approach in general. Our approach in general to justice, to human rights, and civil rights within our society. I mentioned Orgreave, I mentioned blacklisting. This government is now proposing to repeal the 1998 Human Rights Act, which includes the European Convention of Human Rights in its wording, and the case law with it. We will oppose them on that. I want us to be part of a human rights community that recognises the universality of the right to assemble, the right to join a trade union, the right to free speech, the right to practice your faith. If we walk away from international human rights conventions, we're in no place to condemn anybody else for the abuse of human rights within their society. And I want a foreign policy, an international policy for our party. our party that doesn't go down that terrible road we went down in 2003 when we invaded Iraq and were ignorant, or perhaps not so ignorant, of the obvious consequences of what has happened there. And so I want a War Powers Act so that Parliament has to vote on any deployment of British troops anywhere in the world. And we promised during the leadership campaign last year we would deliver an apology for the invasion of Iraq. We have done that, and I think the Chilcot report is a disturbing document for anyone who cares to read all of it. It is very long, I fully understand all of that, but it shows a process, and a dangerous process, that was followed at that time. Surely, if we want a world of peace, we have to work for that world of peace. We have to have a government that's committed to trying to achieve nuclear disarmament. We have to have a government that's committed to promoting decency, peace and justice, and greater levels of equality and environmental sustainability around the world. What we want for ourselves, we want for everyone else. We achieve these things when our communities come together. If a community blames the nearest minority for the shortage of housing, the waiting list at the doctors, the oversized class in the school down the road, you decide it's the fault of somebody because they're of a different nationality, they're a different ethnic group, they come from a different part of the country, or something else, what do you achieve? You achieve a lot of anger, you achieve a lot of bitterness, you achieve a lot of dislocation, and you achieve a lot of hatred. But you know what? At the end of that, you've built no school, you've trained no doctor, you've got no new teacher, nothing has improved. The only thing that's changed is community relations and solidarity have got worse. But when you do things together, when you campaign together to get a better school, to protect your hospital against what a Tory government might do to it, when you do things together, you win, you're stronger, and you go on to achieve things very differently. This campaign is about uniting people. It is about bringing communities together. It is in the great labour movement traditions of solidarity. It's also about saying to everybody, are you comfortable living in a country where there are people sleeping on the streets? Are you comfortable living in a country where some people live 10 and 20 years longer than others because of the poverty they don't enjoy? In other words, those that are wealthy. Are you comfortable with any of that? No, I don't believe any human really is. Our campaign is about challenging power, is about seeking justice, is about bringing people together and uniting them. And so this campaign is doing all of that. I want us, obviously, to win this campaign. And I want our party to recognise in winning that campaign, we've turned our backs on the economics of injustice and inequality. We have set our face towards a future of justice, a future of greater equality, and a future of better prosperity for the next generation. We don't want to leave any community or any part of the country behind. It's what's made our party so strong and so bold. We thank those that have gone before. We thank those that are working with us now. Let's deliver for all of them and for the next generation. Thank you very much.